My name is Chris Arnold. It's actually nice to actually meet you in person instead of just on Facebook. This is for a class at Liberty University called English 607, Teaching Writing. And our objectives today are going to be, it is my hope that if you are a teacher, that I can empower you to create more writing opportunities for students, and we're limiting it to grades 9 and 10 today because there are time constraints. To enable teachers to return writing samples in a timely manner, to give tools to teachers, giving specific feedback to students to help improve their writing, and also to provide opportunities, giving tools for teachers to give specific feedback that their students understand, and then also opportunities for teachers to help students self-adjust their writing to improve. So let's start with what my former goals were when I was a middle and high school English teacher. These were my goals for grading papers. One of them is I didn't want to spend more than 10 minutes per paper. Another one was I wanted there to be consistency from the first paper to the last. Student A decided to talk to student Z. I wanted the same corrections made and nobody could say, how come you marked her wrong and not me, type of thing. That never happened. They never compared grades, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I wanted to correct as many errors as possible so that it was very thorough, and I wanted them returned in a timely manner so that they wouldn't be asking where their papers were. And I wanted to see visible improvement in student writing over time, but I was spending way too much time grading papers. If you do the math there on the 10 minutes per paper, I was lucky to have about 50 students. Most teachers have closer to 100 students. But if you add up the time that it would take to grade 50 papers, it was a full work day, a full 8 hours of just grading papers. I would have loved to have gotten a sub so that I could actually get some work done while I was working. I usually use my weekends like everybody else. I wasn't getting their papers back quickly enough to them either. I was getting burned out. Students were not improving based on my feedback, and I was dreading the process, and that caused me to assign far fewer assignments than I normally would have, basically once a semester. I found it almost impossible to be consistent, but I do think I did a few things well. One of the things that I did is I used a grading rubric that just helped me stay focused on what I was grading for, and I felt it saved me time. Not everybody uses a rubric. I gave 2 grades per paper. One was for mechanics and the other was for content. That way, if a student had really great ideas but just didn't have the organization well, then they could still get a pretty good grade. I thought that was a good idea. I always graded the rough drafts more harshly and thoroughly than the final copy. I felt more students could afford to fail a rough draft or get a poor grade on a rough draft than they could on the final, and I wanted to give them that chance to improve on their final grade. And I assigned journal prompts a couple times a week, so that allowed me to have some small writing assignments. So I think I did those few things pretty well. Now, I'm going to actually hand you a writing sample. I'm going to put you to work here. Feel free to borrow one of my Flair pens there. And I have a rubric if you'd like to follow it. This is the one that I actually used. Sorry about that. So there's my rubric, and here's page 1 of a writing sample that a student gave. While you're actually looking for corrections on there, and I'm not grading your grading, so don't even worry about it, I'm going to talk to you a little bit. Like I said, we have a time constraint here, so I'm going to talk while you're doing that. Hopefully I won't distract you too much. I wanted to tell you about what my research found in regard to grading papers. According to the Collins Group, there are 5 types of writing assignments, and they range from a short, single draft, kind of like a journal prompt type thing, to, and which is graded very quickly, plus minus for participation and effort, all the way up to something that's publish worthy, where you would send it to an editor and it goes through several revisions and has several reviews and lots of editing. So those are the 5 types, that's the range there. We're going to focus only on what the Collins Research Group refers to as type 4, and most research papers fall under this category. In that category, there's substantive content. It meets certain focus correction areas. It's read aloud by the student. I left a word out there. It completes an assignment. In other words, it answers a question about the content. So you might say, what advice would you give to Boo Radley in trying to make, I'm not Boo Radley, but Scout in trying to make friends with Boo Radley, or vice versa. It's easy to read and it's pleasant to read. It's revised and edited. It's critiqued by another student or at least the teacher. And it has 2 drafts. Most research papers fall into this category. And if you want, you can stop grading. It's totally fine. Okay. I want to talk to you about why and how you can, first of all, why you shouldn't spend so much time grading papers. And secondly, how is that even possible? So the first is the why. And here's the deal. After all of your hard work, many of your students will scan for your comments and their grade and won't apply anything you wrote or work on improvement at all. They won't do anything to correct their errors in the next paper that they write. 2, spending too much time grading can lead to assigning less writing, and that is definitely what happened with me. 3, often students are overwhelmed by a variety of errors that they make, not knowing where to start to improve. There are just so many things on the paper, they don't even know where to begin. And 4, oftentimes students have no idea what our correction marks even mean. There's a funny story about a professor who wrote fragment, frag on his students' papers all throughout the semester, and the student finally came up to him on the last day and said, "What does frog mean?" I read that in my textbook for this class, and I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder how many times I did that. So that's the why. It's not beneficial to spend too much time grading papers, and you're probably going to assign fewer papers if you do. But here is the how. I have a list of how. It's right here. We're going to go back and forth between the slides. How to grade less and write more. First one is to assign more type 1 writing assignments. I talked about those at the beginning. They're quick. They're 1 draft. They have a prompt and a quota, anything you want, 150, 300, 500 words, 15 lines, whatever works, 1 page. They're graded with a check or a minus on effort and participation. You can actually grade over the shoulder as they're writing. They're informal, they're timed, and they're quick. And most importantly, it is great practice in getting thoughts on paper. And the more students do it, the better, and you won't spend a lot of time grading it. That's one thing I should have done, was not graded the journals. I should have just marked them for effort. No, sorry. All right, so assign more type 1 writing assignments. Number 2, which is my favorite, and I think the best way to save time, is to explicitly teach and grade on only 2 to 3 conventions per paper. Instead of grading on every grammatical error that you can find, every comma, every misspelled word, every capitalization, every time the subject and verb don't agree, you're going to pick 2 or 3 conventions at a time in the grammar. If you're assigning enough papers over the course of a semester or a year, you should be able to have covered every grammar convention, or at least most of them, and you can always go back and pick up on old ones too if you need to. Hopefully their writing will build on that. Another way is to model public grading so that students know exactly what they're working for when you are grading their papers. So you ask for a student volunteer and ask them to basically sacrifice their paper to be publicly graded in front of the class. In return, their grade will not count. They'll be given the option of making the suggested corrections, presumably for a better grade. You can use a document reader if you have one. If you don't, you can use an electronic copy and project it with a projector onto a whiteboard and grade it that way. You could also videotape yourself grading a paper, thinking out loud and talking out loud so your students know what you're looking for. The benefit of this is it allows students to experience exactly how you're going to grade the paper, and it keeps them from guessing or playing guess what's in the teacher's head. So many students have no clue what their teacher is looking for when they start a writing assignment. So modeling public grading is another way. Student revision using the same criteria that you would be using is another great way. That way you have a student who has previewed the paper for you and hopefully made some marks and some suggestions also. And then you have already, you're the second eyeballs, actually third eyeballs looking at the paper. That's another great way. If you have options, you need to plan it, of course, in your timing. And the authors of my textbook suggested that we stagger the assignments whenever possible. So if you've got 3 classes, then you can, you don't want to have to grade them all at the same time, just, stagger when they're due. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to hand you page 2 of the same paper. And this time, I only want you to look for 3 errors. We're going to look just for passive voice, subject-verb agreement, and correct prepositions. See how you do? We only have about a minute left. And I'm going to conclude the workshop in the meantime, but you just keep working, and then at the end we'll compare and see what was easier for you to do. In conclusion, I would ask you these questions. Do you have any concerns about using any of these methods to grade papers? Are you likely to implement any of these suggestions in future grading assignments? Which ones? And do you feel you could assign more writing opportunities to students using these suggestions? Those are the questions, but I'll leave you with the grading criteria so that you don't get lost. And thank you for coming and listening, and that is the end of Help, I'm an English Teacher, How to Handle Paper Load.